Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Original link to the video, top of the description below. That link to the Discord. Click on it. Send it right over there. I'd love to have you. Let's learn. Hi, guys. Preemptive like, how a young George Washington started a global conflict. Let's go. He was British at the time.
The great city.
Well, he had to have been. It's talking about the 7 Years' War, I think, which was prior to the U.S. Okay.
Pittsburgh.
Okay. Did I say everything? Original link to the video. Also, Minecraft, if that's your thing. Info over to get on the server over on the Discord as well. Let's go. Phones away. If you can hear construction noises in the background, sorry. We might be good, actually. Let's go.
Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. The great city of Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. I've come here on a special mission in search of a world-changing event that happened in this area 270 years ago. It was a time before the United States of America even existed. Yet this event depended on the actions of one of its founding fathers. George Washington's face is instantly recognizable, not least because he's still on the $1 bill. His life was the stuff of legends. He's hero worshipped, he's reviled by some, he's never forgotten. George Washington is one of the most influential people in the history of the United States. He's the man who helped defeat the British, create a new nation, and of course, he would become its first president in 1789. But the accomplishments of Washington in his later life have often overshadowed the less than auspicious adventures of his youth.
For a long time, I've been obsessed with George Washington. I find his life and career so fascinating. He's one of those individuals that I think did help to change the course of history. But what I'm particularly fascinated in is not his later glorious service as Commander-in-Chief of the American armies or as American president, but the fact that early in his life, he presided over a complete and utter fiasco. His first military campaign was out here in what is now western Pennsylvania, and it was a disaster. He was mired in controversy. There were claims of malpractice, of murder, and he also inadvertently started a global war.
World War I? Didn't they want to call 7 Years' War World War I? Okay. I'm in view, right? Yeah, I'm fine.
Washington left Jumonville Glen under no illusion. The French would almost certainly retaliate. He headed back with his men to the Great Meadows, where he pushed on with the construction of Fort Necessity. Initial work was completed on the simple stronghold by the 3rd of June. By the middle of that month, the 150 men Washington had originally brought with him were reinforced by several hundred others, both from the Virginia Regiment and British regulars. Some of Fort Necessity's earthwork defenses still survive, and the wooden stockade has been reconstructed. I'm meeting military historian Jonathan Bratton, who can tell me more about the fort and what Washington did next.
So, Jonathan, my first impression on coming here is we've travelled a long way. We've travelled through miles of woodland. It's swampy. It's much. This is a scary place to be for George Washington. He's miles away from his comfort zone out there on the coast. He's in the middle of nowhere.
He is. He's in the middle of nowhere. He is on the run, and he's on the run because he's just done a thing that is going to make the French garrison at Fort Duquesne very upset. And he's aware of this. He's not unaware that that he's provoked a response. And so he's going to fall back. He falls back to the spot called Great Meadows in order to then be able to dig in, which is literally what we see around us.
So you're an engineer. Why do we dig in? What's that even mean?
Well, there's the very obvious physical effect of wanting to have something between you and the person who's shooting at you. That's always a good thing. The psychological effect of that, again, these are amateur, untrained militia. And so I think one of his thoughts is, if I can get them into a spot where they might feel like they can square off against the French rather than in an open field fight, that's absolutely part of it. And also you need a spot to store your supplies, to store ammunition, and be able to secure yourself if you're going to stay there for a while.
So yeah, I guess he wants to avoid a kind of running battle through the woods.
Right, that would absolutely, utterly annihilate him. Plus, he thinks he might be able to get reinforcements from the colonies, and in fact, he does. He does get 100 men from a provincial company from South Carolina, who turn out to be very good soldiers. But that's about all he's going to receive.
Throughout the remainder of June, Washington ordered his men to improve the road out of Fort Necessity to speed up the arrival of reinforcements that should be on their way. On the 28th of June, though, after he convened a council of war, he ordered his men back to the fort. It wasn't a moment too soon. On the same day, a force of 600 French, Canadian, and Native American troops left Fort Duquesne at the forks of the Ohio, heading for the British at Fort Necessity. At the head of this force was Captain Coulon de Villiers, Jumonville's half-brother.
To them.
Finally, at 11 a.m. on the 3rd of July, 1750, at the head of this force was Captain Coulon de Villiers, Jumonville's half-brother. Finally, at 11 a.m. on the 3rd of July, 1754, the French came within sight of Fort Necessity. Washington was about to face the first real challenge of his military career.
So it must have been pretty terrifying here when you start hearing the French and their Native American allies filtering into these woods and you realize they've arrived.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, Washington's got...
Hold on, guys. When was Napoleon born? 1769. Okay. So how much older is George Washington? 32, so he's 37 years older than Napoleon. Okay. All right. It wasn't really important. I just was curious.
As they've arrived.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, he's got just over 300 men in the Virginia regiment and about 100 more from South Carolina. It's not much. And it's very apparent when everything around begins filling up with the sound of musket fire. French are coming in with about 800 troops, so he is well outnumbered, and those are the French and their native allies as well. And what they do is they immediately, of course, they seize the woodlines, the high ground all around here. And Washington does attempt to actually push, a sally a party out to oppose them. The problem is these are untried militia, and at the first sign of fire, a bunch of the Virginians run back into the fort, and a bunch of them break into the medicinal whiskey and actually get rather intoxicated.
Whoa, that backfires.
That backfired very quickly. The South Carolina provincials, who are a little bit more trained, they're sort of holding, and then Washington realizes if they stay out there, they're just going to get flanked and die. They pulls everybody back in right here. And so on July 3rd, that's his situation, is he is surrounded inside this fort of his own making.
And to make matters worse for the defenders, a thunderstorm broke out.
With 300 or 400 guys in here would be pretty cozy.
Very.
Wouldn't that make it bad for the attacker too?
When he writes, they talk about he's beginning to take casualties. It's very easy to see why. If you're firing a musket from right there, and there's 300 people packed right here, it's hard not to hit someone. And he talks about the numbers beginning to mount.
Does he bow to the inevitable?
He can't fire back. The men are demoralized. Their supplies are pretty well depleted. As much as he would love to make some sort of a stand, he can't. The French also realize it, and they send an emissary and they say, we want to give you the opportunity to surrender before the inevitable, before we're forced to destroy you. And so he is unwillingly, but by necessity, all pun intended, forced to a surrender.
I'm trying to imagine the young George Washington. He's in his early 20s, his first command. Half the men are drunk. There's a gigantic thunderstorm. You're taking casualties. You're surrounded by the French and their allies baying for blood. I can't think of a worse situation.
It's not too far to say that this is the low point of his career, which when you consider what's going to happen to him in 1776 in New York, in the campaigns in New York, is saying a lot. Because those were bad days. And yet nothing, I think, is worse than this, which I think is going to inform him personally, knowing if I made it through this, if I made it through this Fort Necessity experience, I can make it through a lot more.
I guess, you know, failure, it's a good teacher, isn't it?
I was about to say, you know, well, George Washington, but this is prior to America, so I keep having to remind myself, no, this isn't America yet. This is British. He's British right now, fighting the French. And so I was going to say, you know, for a younger country, having a disciplined army is going to be tougher, but that is a null and void point because it's not even America yet. So why are the French seemingly more organized? It's just one battle, so I can't say that this is the entirety of what the British armies in North America are like in terms of discipline, but anyways.
It was a disaster for Washington. He had no choice but to make terms with the French. He sent 2 men to meet with them, and they soon returned with a document for him to sign. If the skirmish at Jumonville Glen had dangerously strained British-French relations, this document was about to blow it up.
There were only a few men in Washington's party with enough French to act as a translator, and Washington later, well, threw them under the bus. He said he was not given a proper, accurate translation of the document that he was about to sign. And I've got a copy of it here, the Articles of Capitulation, written, of course, in French. Now, if Washington had been able to speak French, he'd have noticed right at the top, it's pretty obvious what he's signing up to. It says that the French had no interest, no intention of troubling the peace and the harmony that existed between les deux princes amis, the 2 friendly princes, Britain and France, mais seulement de venger l'assassin, but only to revenge the murder of the French officer. That's pretty strong language. And to stop the establishments of any settlements on land owned by the king, my master. Washington's signing up to some pretty unambiguous language here. Again, right at the end down here. Okay, release the prisoners qui nous ont fait dans l'assassinat de Seigneur de Jumonville, who were captured during the murder of Jumonville. Now, Washington brilliantly signs this on the 4th of July, 1754, a day that later in his life would become a significant anniversary. But on this occasion, it's a day on which he basically signed up to admitting that he'd murdered a French officer and basically started a war.
The signing of this document would have bloody consequences across the globe. But it turned...
Look, I especially because the past 2 years I've been watching so many, you know, British history videos and very little American ones. If I do watch American history videos, I don't even record them. I just watch them myself because I'm interested. But that was a big thing of me starting the channel. I love to watch British people react to American history stuff, and so maybe I'll reciprocate it, you know, and it'll catch on. But I don't know that much more about American history than I do about English history, to be honest. I had a point, and I forget what it was, because I had to talk.
Turned out to be a good short-term deal for Washington. His soldiers were allowed to return to Virginia unharmed, drums beating, their flags still in their possession.
Washington, together with a comrade, were taken as hostages to ensure that the French prisoners would be released by the British. He also had to promise that he would not return to the Ohio country for a year. Frankly, it was pretty lenient given the severity of what he'd done, but there would be repercussions. They'd be global, and they'd quickly escalate.
News of the 2 battles at Jumonville Glen and Great Meadow reached Britain in August 1754. Despite the tensions between Britain and France, the Duke of Newcastle, the British Prime Minister, decided to take action. He asked Major General Edward Braddock to lead an expedition in 1755 to remove the French forces now occupying Fort Duquesne in the Ohio River Valley. That campaign was a disaster. Not only did Braddock fail to capture the fort, he was also killed in the process.
So following defeat of Braddock, do both sides start sending reinforcements?
So it begins to be a gradual escalation on both sides. It's not just the British who are backing up their provincial here, so to speak, in North America. The French also are beginning to be belligerent. They're beginning to reinforce their forces in North America. The British are also going to respond and they begin ambushing. They try to ambush the French convoys over to North America, and there are back and forth, so to speak, until Louis XV can no longer say, well, we're not at war. You actually have the flashpoint of that he needs to actually make the decision to declare war. What is the cost of that? That's going to be across the empires of both these great nations.
Now, Winston Churchill called this the First World War, didn't he? What's going on there?
You have two empires that have spread so far out on their peripheries that a conflict is then going to necessitate a conflict on the periphery. So the fighting that begins in North America, sure, it'll spread back to Europe, and it'll look a lot like a European war. Frederick the Great will do Frederick the Great things in Prussia, and you'll see the large-scale operations, sweeping armies.
I feel like if it's just the fact that Britain and France were at war, and at the time Britain and France had these overseas colonies across the globe, doesn't necessarily. I feel like what made the world wars were the fact that, you know, Japan and China were kind of involved. If you don't have countries over there, then what makes a world war, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Through Europe, you're also going to then see fighting extend to the Caribbean. You will see fighting extend to India, of all places. You have this problematic point where a poor decision by a young Virginia officer leads to fighting across the entire globe as both sides are battling for each other's colonies.
But isn't it still mainly Britain against France? And just because their people are spread around the globe and they're fighting over territory in India, does that make it a world war?
It's a great opportunity for each to grow their power, and all of that is due to the fact that a poor provincial lieutenant colonel of the Virginia militia couldn't read French.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.
I love Dan Snow. Yeah, I forget. I had a point I was going to make where I paused and then I talked about something unrelated and then I forgot my point and I still forget it and it's annoying me. But yeah, honestly, what makes a world war? And I need to learn more about American history. I almost feel ashamed. Hope you're all doing well. I can't wait to see your comments, see if you answered any of my questions or posed questions yourself, learned something. And I'll see you guys next time, all right? Bye, guys.